Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the principles of design, in particular, the principle of design of balance. So, this recording is going to cover chapter 7, part 1 on balance. So, when an artist designs an image, what they're doing is they're organizing all those formal elements that we learned about before: line, different kinds of line, different ways of depicting space, light and color, texture, pattern, time and motion into a unified whole. And when the organizing of these formal elements is also known as composition. So just to design or a design and composition, those are interchangeable. But some people believe that there's no real rules when you're making art, that you can just throw any crap on any sort of surface and then all of a sudden you have a work of art. Like, I'm an artist, hey, I'm throwing stuff. But really seriously, like, if you want to be a good artist, knowing the principles of design will help you create aesthetically stronger works of art. And by aesthetically, I mean they're going to look better. So the principles of design are these: balance, focal point and emphasis, scale and proportion, repetition and rhythm, unity and variety. So we're going to talk about balance in today's recording. So this is the distribution of visual weight in an artwork, which means bom, bom, but we're going to learn what it means in a minute. So there's three main kinds of balance, and one of them is broken up into two components. So the first is symmetrical balance, where there's absolute symmetry and bilateral symmetry. There's asymmetrical balance, and there's radial balance. And we'll go over what each one of those means. So no one likes to feel unbalanced. Like, you don't like to be walking along and all of a sudden you step on something unstable. And we also don't like to look at things that are unbalanced, whether we realize this or not. So we're going to look at this image. I'm not going to draw on it because I tried to draw on it before and then the recording got stuck. So we're looking at this image, and on this image, there is a mule that's up in the air, and there's a cart with way too many packages on it. So we know that literally this cart is literally unbalanced because it's so heavy that the mule is thrown up in the air, like you're on a seesaw where somebody's heavier on one side than the other. But this is also like visually unbalanced. So when we talked about the basic formal elements before, if in this case we're going to talk about darks and lights. So in order for an image to be balanced, there needs to be an even distribution of basic formal elements. And in this case, in terms of darks and lights, in terms of contrast, there is not an even distribution. For example, if you look at the right half of the image and you squint your eyes, you're going to see primarily really light values, all this white, all these cream colors. And then if you squint your eyes and you look at the left side of the image, you're going to see a lot more darks and like middle tones, the gray of the sidewalk, and some light. So there's grays and darks on this left side, but they're very, very, very little grays and darks on the right. So that in part makes it look imbalanced because we are drawn to high contrast. And so the left side has more contrast and values between the darks and the lights and the grays and the right side does. So that's one thing. Then another thing is another way of distributing weight is like distributing different kinds of lines. So this image has a multitude of, of directional lines that all lead in the same direction. If we start at the top of the mule's head and we follow what it's hooked to with the cart, and you run down, it all runs down to this lower right corner. You follow these packages, they're all angled pretty much so toward that lower right corner. But we need other kind of lines that are going to pull us to other parts of the pictures. But because there's a preponderance of directional lines that are all angled down toward the lower right, that means that this isn't balanced. And there's not anything that's going to direct us to look at other parts of the image. So nobody likes to look at an unbalanced picture. This one on the left, it's also unbalanced. It's kind of chaotic. Like there's just a bunch of crap everywhere. But there's also like, see this ball down here? This ball is touching the lower right edge of the right side of the picture, the bottom of the picture. And because it's directly touching that right side and that bottom side, our eyes are drawn toward the edge of the picture and not drawn back into the picture. There's also like the way things are lined up is like this fox, and I don't know what this is, and this farmer, and everything's kind of on this far right side leads us straight down. In the middle, we have a key, and then we have, I guess, a lightning strike and a tree, and a God knows what that is. I think it's the earth, and then maybe this is hell, and then we're drawn straight down again. So there's like a whole lot of lining up things where even though some things go at an angle, but they all go at this angle toward the lower right again, or they go straight up and down to the very bottom, or they touch the edge here, which leads us to the bottom. And we don't want to be led in any one direction. We want to be led all over the place. So this is like a really excellent image that's very well balanced, and there's multiple reasons why this is. I'm going to go to the next slide and look at this. So there's lots and lots of different kind of lines. There are directional lines. The directional lines are those lines that start in one place and go all the way down until they touch something else. That's one form of directional line. Directional lines are also created by rows of objects. So there's all these rows of bricks. So like there's some of the directional lines lead down, some lead over to the left, some angle back down this way. Although these are like implied lines where the girl is pointing toward her dad, and the box that her dad has in his hand is pointing back toward the girl, and this directional line right here is going all the way over to the box, and this directional line right here is going all the way over to the man. And I didn't draw this one in, but this directional line right here is going to the bricks. So there are lines that are pointing in multiple different directions, all these directional lines and implied lines and lines of sight, which lead us all over the picture, which is what we want. There are also repetitions of patterns. There's the patterns of the bricks here, 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 here. There's the patterns of the cobblestones. There's the patterns on the grill of the air conditioner, on the designs on the tiles, on this fretwork here. There's patterns everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. There's even patterns in these grills back here that lead you all over the picture. But there are also repetitions of darks. There may not be as much dark in one area as in the other, but there is dark everywhere. So there's this dark here. There's this dark in the shadows here. There's a shadow here. Man's dark suit, they're dark here. That dark shadow, dark inside of the grill, dark, dark, dark. All those darks lead you everywhere. And then something else that kind of leads you back and forth is this person's choice of photographing something that has complementary colors. So there's complementary colors of red over here, complementary colors of green over here. And because green and red neutralize each other out, your eye gently kind of goes back and forth between the red, the green, the red, the green, because complementary colors are really stable, and when we see them together, we're drawn toward both of them. So there's lots of things that made that image super well balanced, and primarily it had to do with that visual distribution of basic formal elements, the repetition of patterns everywhere, the repetitions of lines going in different directions, and those were implied lines, directional lines, lines of sight, the repetition of the black everywhere, and the complementary colors, red and green, which are balancing each other out. So now we're going to talk about the different kinds of balance. There's symmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance occurs, I can't pronounce that word, in an artwork where both sides of the artwork are more or less equal in visual weight. So they're both sides of the artwork are, like the way things are structured, they're equal, and both sides are in absolute symmetry, which is one kind of symmetrical balance. Both sides are exact or near exact mirror images of one another. When you write about this, I don't want you to give me the definition. I want you to apply the definition to the image you're looking at. So we're looking at this image of the Taj Mahal. And if we look at these directional lines on the right and the left that create these turrets here, these shapes, this is the same shape as this is. This is the same shape as this is. Same height, same color. You divide the Taj Mahal down the middle. The left side is exactly the same as the white side. The white side, the right side, there's more or less an even distribution of white on both sides and grays within and darks within. If you look at the foreground where this pond is, and you look at the trees on either side, they're not exactly the same, but they're almost exactly the same. So we divide this image down the middle. There's an equal amount of red and the same size shape, equal amount of is pink and the same size shape, equal amount of green, same shape, equal amount of green, same shape, equal amount of dark green trees, more or less. So both sides are equally, like the visual weights, equally distributed because the shapes are the same, the colors are the same, the values are the same. So I'm not going to go into the details of the Taj Mahal because I want you to read about it. I just want to talk about the balance for this video. So this piece by Georgia O'Keeffe of the skull is absolute symmetry, because if you divide that skull down the middle, the left side of the skull is shaped the same, more or less, as the right side. Like on either side of it, there's almost an equal amount of blue on this left side and an equal amount of blue on the right side. This black bar, it's like directly down the middle. There's almost an equal amount of red on the left and right sides. That's absolute symmetry. Like I am going to pronounce this wrong, but I believe it is the Tsimshian mass. These are North American Pacific Native American tribes. So a lot of the Tsimshian artwork uses absolute symmetry. And a lot of them will have the raven in it. And the raven, it's like it helps people shape and transform their lives. And the raven is a trickster who screws things up, at times is impulsive and thoughtless, which is kind of the way the world goes sometimes. Like you think things are going as planned and then they don't. This piece by Diane Arbus is almost, not quite, but almost a mirror image of these two twins, and the amount of white on either side. There's a little bit more of the brick on the left than the right. And if anybody ever saw The Shining, the two twins in it, the director of The Shining actually borrowed or were inspired of those two twins were inspired by this Diane Arbus photograph of these identical twins. So a lot of times people, this date's wrong. We're not in the year 12,010. Boy, 120,010. It's supposed to be 2010. So a lot of times people will think, oh, like that person's really beautiful, their face is symmetrical, but nobody's face is absolutely symmetrical. So this artist, Julian Wolkenstein, he created a series of photographs of people who seem to have absolutely symmetrical faces, but he proves they don't. So this girl on the far right, this is how she looks, but although she does not have a line down the middle of her face. So then he took each of those halves and he made a mirror image of it. So then you see that really this girl's face is not symmetrically balanced. There's like discrepancies on either side. So when an artwork is not quite symmetrical, but it's almost, there'll be like discrepancies in the image, but it's almost symmetrical. This is called bilateral symmetry. So again, when you have to write about this, don't give me the definition. I know the definition. I want you to apply the definition to the image. So we're going to look at this painting by Frida called Frida Kahlo, called The Two Fridas, and this uses bilateral symmetry. So if we divide it down the middle, the shapes of the two women are more or less the same. The clouds on the left and right, there's a more or less, the pattern's the same of the clouds. There's more or less equal amount of the white and the dark blue in the clouds. But when we start looking closer at this, they're not exactly the same. For one, on the right, she has on different color clothes, and on the left, she has on white. What makes it kind of evens it out some is that there's a lot of intricate pattern on the clothes on the left, and a lot of pattern will kind of balance out a lot of different colors. So lots of details versus solids. That kind of can balance things out. Her arms, they're almost the same, but this arm's holding this little egg that has Diego's picture on it, and this arm's holding a suture because Diego's broken her heart. So the shapes of them are the same, and the distribution of the patterns in the background are more or less the same, but there are discrepancies in it, and that makes it bilateral symmetry. So this picture of the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, this is bilateral symmetry. So we divide this image in half. Let me see if I divided it in half. I didn't. We divide it in half, and like Christ is in the middle. It uses 1-point linear perspective, and the shapes on the left and right are more or less the same. The darks on the left or right are more or less the same. There's an equal number, am I right? Yes, of disciples on the left and right, but the way they're positioned, they're not positioned the same. They're like the clumpings of the group, or the directions people are looking, the way they're gesturing with their arms are not exactly the same, but more or less the shapes and the distribution of lights and darks and colors is more or less a mirror image on either side. So this Roman Vishniac photograph, both of these, they're more or less bilateral symmetry because there's somebody in the middle. There's these two women on the left and the right, and there's an equal amount of white on the left and the right, but there's discrepancies. So it's not exactly, it's not absolute symmetry, it's bilateral symmetry. And this little girl, like, there's this textured ground behind her, there's this line here, and there's like an implied line because these lines don't all connect, Over on this right side, it's a little bit darker here. There's this little car here. So it's more or less bilaterally symmetrical. And notice how I'm like I'm actually describing the what it shares in common on the left and right, and what makes it a little different on the left and right. And when you're writing your paper, which you're going to be doing soon, you're going to have to describe that stuff. So here's more examples of things that are bilaterally symmetrical. Even though they're not exactly the same on the left and right, the shapes of the people are different, but the way they're laid out on the left and right of Christ, on these panels on the left and right, and below on the left and right, even though like there's some differences, but we see the length of Christ here, we see the length of the coffin here, we see this shape here, we see this shape here. So they're more, this person's here, this person's here, more or less symmetrical, so they're bilateral symmetry. And the reason why, like, so I'm showing this image in Northern Europe and Southern Europe, the way the crucifixions were shown were really different. Like in Northern Europe, especially like in Germany, they were really gory, and there's like blood and Christ's body's decomposing, there's flies everywhere. But then in Southern Europe, like Christ looks like he's just, hey, look at me, look how clean I am, I'm just hanging out waiting for tomorrow. And then this one is like, I'm really dying here, my body's rotting. So they're just like, Germans, gross. Southern Europeans, I took a bath, I'm nice and clean. Here's just some other examples of bilateral symmetry. I love this Maria Magdalena Campos Pons. Like this has to do with Yoruba traditions, and I believe, I don't want to misspeak, I believe she's like Afro-Cuban, and these are Yoruba water goddesses, and this has to do with the diaspora, people being forcibly taken from Africa to Europe and the Americas, and but it also has to do with the interconnection of those people that were forced to come over here and their previous traditions. And she uses this blue, this indigo blue, because this represents the indigo that was highly prized, that people harvested in Africa, and then Europeans started wanting to have indigo dyes in their clothing, and so often they would kidnap people that were well skilled at growing indigo, and they would bring them to the Caribbean. Then this image by Frida Kahlo, also you divide it down the middle, and although things are different, they're bilateral symmetry because of the shapes of things, because of the all these women are straight in the middle. The hands are almost in the middle. These shapes of this little planet and this planet are different, but it balances out because this is really dark, lots of darks over here, and a little bit of yellow. It's a saturated yellow. Lots of light greens over here, and a lot more of the saturated red. So like red's really bright, and it's heavier than, let's say, yellow. So it kind of helps balance out the two sides. So the next kind of balance that we're going to talk about is asymmetrical balance. And this can still be achieved even when the two sides of the artwork are not mirror images of one another. But we need to go into details about what makes it asymmetrical and not just badly balanced. So one way you determine asymmetrical balance is you divide it down the middle, and then you're like, oh, look, the two sides are not the same. The visual weight's not distributed the same. And then you look at the opposite quadrants and kind of think about like, well, there's a lot of darks up here in the upper right. There's a lot of darks in the lower right, in the picture frame, in her jacket, in that big glob of cloth that's laying on that table, and the shadows under the table. And then when you look at the lower right quadrant and the upper right quadrant, the colors are not, like, there are darks, but not as much. There are lighter valued areas equally on both sides. And there's kind of like middle tones as well on both sides. So this has got more darks with some light. This has got more darks with some light. This is more of a like lights, darks, and middle tones in these two opposite quadrants. So another thing that you look for is there a diagonal orientation of elements. So like you're not going to just make up diagonals. You're going to like try to connect. It's like you're connecting the dots. So we start with the gold at the top of the picture frame. We angle down, we hit this woman's head. We angle down further, we hit her hand. And we angle down further and we come to the edge of that jewelry box. So I didn't make up that line. This is like an implied line where you connect the dots from one thing to the other. That's a diagonal orientation. Sometimes it's on the right to left, sometimes it's left to right, and sometimes it's both. So in this one, it's both. So we have the edge of the picture frame, and we angle down, we touch her hand, we angle down, we touch her other hand, we touch the hem of her skirt, and then we touch the, if I kept going, I'd touch the bottom of her skirt. So you're gonna look for like diagonal positioning of things. And when we do our homework, if it helps you to draw a line on the image to prove that it does have that diagonal thrust, although you'll still have to explain it, please do so. So you want to also look for two basic formal elements repeat throughout the picture, guiding your eye around the whole picture. So, so like in all types of balance, you want that to happen. But in asymmetrical balance, you really need to prove that it's happening more so. So gold repeats in this image. It's golds or yellow golds. It's here. It's in the highlights of her skin. It's on her stomach. It's in her skirt. It's on the table. There's a little bit like dark gold shades under the table. It's in the curtain. It's in the highlights on the wall. So it's in the image too. So there's that kind of gold, yellowish gold, can be tints, tones, and shades, repeats throughout the whole image. And then what else repeats? Black repeats. Dark values repeat. It's here, 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 it's here. When you write about this, you have to not say it's here, it's here, it's here. You have to say it's in the picture frame on the wall, on the left. It's in the shadows cast on that left wall. It's in the picture, around the picture frame on the right. Within the picture, there are dark colors. It's between the gold stripes. It's in her jacket. It's in the shadow of her mantilla. It's in the pleats, the shadows of the pleats of her skirt. It's in the black and white tiles. It's in the shadows under the table and on the floor. And it's in the jewelry box. So that black is repeating everywhere. And then like you just figure out, like, you can't say that patterns repeat. Why can't you say that? Because they only repeat on the floor. They don't repeat everywhere. You can say implied lines repeat. This corner of this picture frame is pointing down here. The corner of the box is pointing at the picture, this other picture frame, which creates an implied line. Her hand is pointing toward the blue cloth. That creates an implied line. This lower hand on the table also points toward the blue cloth. Her pleat, like the corner of the table points toward her skirt. Her there's a whole lot of them, like the squares. Those are directional lines because they directly touch your skirt. Also, directional lines repeat all over the place, and you will have to tell me where they are and not just say they repeat. So this image uses asymmetrical balance. Let's go through it. It's got the diagonal orientation of elements. So we go from the tree to this crack in the crevasse here, crack in the rocks, and this crevasse in the rocks, and along the rocks, and then you like keep following the shape of the rocks down to here. There's also, like, if you go from the top of the tree and you angle down, you're going to touch St. Francis's head, and then you're going to end up like lining up with this crossbar on this thing where the vines are growing. I don't know what it's called. This thing. So let's look at these two images. I did a really bad Photoshop job, but one of them is unbalanced and the other one's not. Which one is it? It's the one on the left. Because the one on the left, like, so there's darks, 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 but we need something to draw us over to the left, and there's no dark there. So all the darks are kind of clustered up around here. But here there's a little bit of dark. There's dark there on the mountain in the background. There's dark on top of the mountain. There's dark kind of in this cave area. There's darks in the plants. There's darks in the shadows. There's a dark here. And then we go to this dark here. Oops, my bad. So there's those darks that pull us everywhere. There's textures everywhere. There's textures in the rocks. There's textures in the shapes of the trees. There's textures in the vines. There's textures in the grass. There's textures that pull us everywhere. There are directional lines that pull us everywhere, and you'll have to describe where they are. There's this yellow, kind of light yellow ochre, and there's also like an analogous color scheme. There's like these yellow gray tones. There's yellows, there's greens, there's oranges, there's dark greens, and all of these, like, there's the color of his robe, and all of them are colors that are mixed with the primary color yellow, whether those be tints, tones, or shades. So that analogous color scheme helps to keep it balanced. This one we think, oh, is this bilateral symmetry? But no, it's not. It's asymmetrical balance because there's this diagonal thrust. We go from this kid's shoes along the body of this other kid up to that tree. There's also this diagonal thrust of the fence as we run along the fence. So this uses asymmetrical balance. Radial balance, this is the last one we're going to talk about. Radial balance, you think of a bicycle wheel. You think that there is a central point. The central point does not have to be in the middle of the image. There's a central point, and everything radiates off of that central point. A lot of, like, sacred art uses radial balance. The image may be circular, but not necessarily so. So at each one of these images, there's something that's centrally located, and then all the other imagery is coming off of that central point, just like a bicycle wheel. Here's some more examples of radial balance. Those are like the most obvious examples because they're circles and things are radiating off them, but not all of them are going to be obvious. So a lot of times when an image uses one-point linear perspective, it'll be radial balance. So we look at this image right here, and let's go to the next slide. The vanishing point is where everything radiates off the vanishing point in that image that's taken place during a hurricane. Now this other image is like, it does use one-point linear perspective, but that's not what's going to make it radially balanced. So we look at, there's a kid in the center riding a tricycle, And then everything else, all the other kids are laid out around that kid. So let's look at it. So here's like his bicycle handles, and then everything is radiating, all the placement of all these kids and all this activity is radiating off that central point of that kid's bicycle handles. So that's where we're going to leave off on today's lecture. And I hope you enjoyed it. If I can only figure out how to turn it off. End meeting. In